welcome back to The Path Forward, Mental Health with Maps. Today, I will be talking with Sam Bergman, the Executive Director of Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music. We've invited Sam onto our mental health focused podcast because if you have ever been moved to tears by a piece of music, felt a jolt of inspired energy when listening, or believed that the lyrics of a song were speaking directly to your own life, then you know that music has a unique capacity to identify and express our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. And today, Sam and I are going to take a deep dive into how music has interwoven with his life. So welcome to the table, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to definitely talk a little bit about Apple Hill at some point because it's a beloved organization here within this community and throughout the world. So we'll definitely get to that. But where I'd like to start today is if you can take us way, way, way back in your life to when music first became something important to you.
Yeah, so music was always in our house. My parents both loved music, although they loved very different kinds of music. My mother had grown up in Minnesota playing clarinet and a little bit of piano, but had never pursued it, particularly beyond high school, I think. And my dad loved, rock music and folk music and everything that was happening in the 60s and 70s, but never played himself and loves to say that he's tone deaf and loves to demonstrate that if given the chance. And so it was really me just sort of feeling my way as a very small child that had me bump into music. And I don't know what really happened because my mother's version of this story is that I read an article in the Boston Globe about Suzuki violin and the Suzuki method. And I was 3.
Okay. So this is family lore.
Yes. I think I saw a picture in the Boston Globe. I think there was probably a photograph. Dr. Suzuki at the time was bringing large groups of kids over from Japan to the U.S., exporting his method of teaching music to very young students, which was a new idea at the time, at least in some parts of the world, including the U.S. And so I think I saw a photo of one of these trips and these kids playing music together. And I said, well, I want to do that. And my mom said, well, last week you wanted to be a firefighter, so let's see where this goes. And I did not apparently stop bugging her for 9 months.
No kidding.
And so for my 4th birthday, I got a very small violin from, the Char catalog or wherever. And my parents had found a Suzuki teacher there in our little town. We were living in Concord, Massachusetts. And I started taking violin lessons. And almost immediately, it was my favorite thing. And the Suzuki method, for any of, I know that you're familiar, but for any of your listeners who don't know, it's a very particular way of teaching music that approaches it from the standpoint that you meet kids where they're at. And you don't immediately try to teach them to read music off the page. Instead, you teach them by ear. They listen to recordings of the pieces they're going to be playing. They learn them that way. They learn them by repeating, by, observing their teacher playing, and they mimic it. And then over time, you learn those other skills like reading music. But one of the cornerstones of Suzuki is that in addition to your private lessons, you have a group lesson every week with other kids at your approximate level of development, and you're all there together, and you do a bunch of fun exercises together, and you play pieces together. And because the Suzuki method is built on albums of pieces that are designed to sort of teach you as you go, like each piece is kind of a new skill, everyone learns the pieces in the same order. Every once in a while, maybe your teacher might have you skip one, but for the most part, you learn them all, you go through all the books. And so everyone at your approximate level can play the same pieces you can play. So there's this great joy to just playing together. And right from the beginning, even before you're doing what we would call ensemble music, where you're playing different parts, you're all just playing together, and it builds confidence. It makes you feel like this is a community that you're a part of, even before you have a word for community, right? So I was hooked. And I did this, I studied with my Suzuki teacher for about 3.5 years. And then I switched to a new teacher who was not a Suzuki teacher. She was the principal second violin of the Boston Symphony. And her name will be very familiar to anyone my age or a little younger who grew up in New England. Her name was Mary Lou Speaker Churchill. And she was this absolute legend, not only as one of the prominent violinists in the Boston Symphony, but as this teacher who over the years taught an ungodly number of students, and it was her first love. It was the thing that she loved most about music, was passing it on to the next generation. I will never have a teacher like her, just incredibly kind and supportive and generous. And at one point invited my mom and me to spend a week with her at Tanglewood, where we got to sit in on BSO rehearsals. I got to play Frisbee on the lawn with the new hot young concertmaster of the Boston Symphony. And I got to have lessons with her every day. Wow. And so music was not the slog that it is sometimes depicted as, when we all think of music lessons, because you do have to practice a lot. And whatever people tell you, nobody really likes practicing that much. But it didn't feel onerous to me. It felt like this was my community. This was the thing that I loved to do. And I loved being surrounded by other people who also loved it.
So the idea that a community came in pretty early into your experience, it sounds like, and you also had a parent who was responsive.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful when a parent retells a story with an embellishment that shows the high regard that they have for their child. So I'm thrilled for you that you were such a precocious reader of the Boston Globe in your preschool years. It's wonderful. But so community was a big part of what felt good about doing this. And then it continued to unfold more and more experiences of community. Now some people are just natural community builders, and that's what they do. Yeah. And sometimes it's the activity that helps to create the community. Did you have community everywhere you went in your life, like throughout your childhood, or was there something unique to music?
I did not. This was, I think, one of the things that made music such a central part of my life was that I was not good at making friends in other contexts. I had a few friends at school, but for the most part, I was one of the odd kids out. I tried playing youth sports a little bit, but I was real bad at it. I played soccer for a couple of years, and I think I scored one goal, and it was kind of by cheating. And so I was not good at a lot of the things other kids were good at. So no, I didn't have that sense of community other than in music. And actually, a really central thing that happened when I was a kid was when I was 10, my family moved away from Massachusetts. We left Concord, Mass, and we moved to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is outside Philadelphia. And we were way outside Philadelphia. We were growing up in the woods, basically, which suited me fine. But I was really broken up about leaving the musical community I had in Boston. I'd been studying at New England Conservatory's Saturday program that they call their prep division. I'd been playing in orchestra. I'd been doing chamber music. I had friends there that I saw, and suddenly I wasn't going to see them anymore. And I took it really hard. According to my parents, it was about a 3-year sulk. And I also was still not making friends all that well at school in our new state. And so what my parents did to try to sort of make up for this was they said, well, there's this camp in Western Massachusetts in the summer that a bunch of your Boston friends are going to be going to. It's a music camp. We'll send you there. You'll get to hang out with them in the summer. And so I started to go to this camp called Greenwood, which was America's first chamber music camp, I think. It was founded in 1933 by these two amazing teachers, Bunny Little and Ruth McGregor, basically as a place to take their own students in the summertime. And then over the decades, it just grew and grew. They eventually bought a farm in the Berkshire Hill towns of Western Mass, and that's where the camp is today. It's run today by this amazing violinist out of New York named Becca Fisher, who I grew up going to Greenwood with. And so Greenwood became my community. And that was my first introduction to what I would say is summer camp culture, which is also what eventually brings me around to Apple Hill, which also, among the many things we do, we run a summer music camp for most of the summer. And there is an element of community to summer places like that in the lives of adults also, but especially kids. And it was, it's not an exaggeration to say it was life-saving for me, because so much in the rest of my life didn't feel in my control, and I wasn't fitting in terribly well, but this was a place I could fit in, and this was a place I could feel at times like a leader and like I was doing something right. And that really became sort of a foundational part of who I was.
And in the spaces in between, so when you're not at camp, because most of the year you're not at camp as a kid, So where did it exist within you? Like when I'm thinking like a particularly rough day at school, or
Sure.
when you're not feeling like you fit in, like what would happen inside of you? How did that camp offer a resource to you at those moments?
Well, this was back in the late 80s and early 90s. So we were writing each other letters. I mean, we would, at the end of camp every summer, I don't know if they still do this at Greenwood, but they might. Everybody would bring a blank notebook to camp with them. And the last few days of camp, everyone would write in each other's notebooks as if it was a yearbook at school, right? Like just writing messages to your friends. But a yearbook, you're usually writing a sentence or two. This would be like people would write novels in these books. People would spill their guts about like everything that they loved about their friends and how they were going to talk during the year. And so we would do this somewhere in a box in my house. My Greenwood books still exist. I know I never threw them out. They're somewhere. And then we would just write to each other through the year. There was no email yet. So it was just sometimes you'd get a letter, or sometimes you would feel like you wished you'd gotten a letter. And so you'd write one and then you'd get one back. And sometimes we'd call each other. I don't remember a ton of that, but I think it was mainly we would just hang on to what we had in those summer months and then know that it was coming back again the next year.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And you know, my part of why I was so why you even came onto my radar was because of how much summer camp culture for musicians has impacted, you know, my child's life. And I have a Gen Zer, and life is rugged for the Gen Zers at the moment. This is a hard time to come of age.
It is.
And I've watched that in her too, that, you know, during different moments where mental health is a struggle, I think for so many of the Gen Zers, the idea of, you know, thinking about that really good friend from summer camp that you can reach out to. And it's specifically these musicians create this really fascinating, there's a fascinating culture within the music community.
They do, and some of it is really complex, and some of it, you know, gets to things that are particular to music. But I think most of it really is just this is a place where people who don't always feel normal can feel normal. And in that way, it's not so different from sports or from the kids who love doing theater or, you know, any other thing that brings kids together into a community where they can feel like there are other people like them. And one of the things that we talked about a lot at Apple Hill the last couple of years as we were, you know, emerging from COVID back into a time when we'd be able to have fully enrolled sessions, we lost several years, you know, to not being able to safely do that. And one of the things that we've been realizing in talking to the students who come to our camp, especially the teenagers, is it has never been a more important time for kids to have a place where they can just feel normal, because the world doesn't feel normal right now, and the country doesn't feel normal, and sometimes New Hampshire doesn't feel normal. And to have a place where where the whole signature ethos of the place is wherever you are, we will take you as you come.
Yeah.
You know, you will always have a home here. This is a place where we want you to feel that you don't have to fit into our particular set of, you know, pegs and holes. Be who you are, and we will sculpt the place around you rather than the other way around.
And I will say firsthand, as a parent who is not a musician, whose child does, you know, has participated in Apple Hill and looks so forward to it every year, and probably will participate all the way through her 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, I have watched exactly what you're talking about. I was profoundly moved the first year she went, and then as a parent when we arrive to watch the wrap-up concerts and to pick up the campers, I was profoundly moved by how vibrant the welcoming community was. Yeah. And I felt like my child, who's, you know, not a child, she's a teenager, but my child has found a place where she belongs.
Right.
And that's all you want.
Well, and it's one of those things where when you're talking about, you know, music or anything else where there's an element of competition, you have to be so intentional about the way you set up the world that you are offering to students, because it's very easy for it to slip into a competitive environment, for people to feel like only, you know, the very best players, the most experienced ones are going to be fully supported and everyone else is just sort of there. We want the opposite of that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, one of the big founding ideas of Apple Hill was that Apple Hill would take, you know, musicians, participants of all ages, of of all backgrounds, of all experience levels, and we don't have normal auditions. We just have people send us sort of like a recent recording of you playing so that we can place you in a group with other people who will feel supportive to you. And what I love watching in those final concerts that you talked about is, see, our sessions are not that long. They're 10 days. So parents haven't seen their kid for 10 days. And then watching them see a level of performance that they didn't know that their kid was capable of. That is such a unique thing. And it's something that we would not notice because we've been there the whole time. We've been watching them rehearse. We've been watching them get their arms around whatever it is that we assign them. And then their family comes and they're like, well, we've never seen them do that before. Like, where did that come from? And it didn't come from us. It came from them. All we did was set up an environment where they felt free to explore whatever that element was of music that they hadn't previously. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. And so the theme of the importance of community in that way, feeling like a deep, true sense of belonging and support from the community that we are in, throughout all the conversations we've had in this particular season, that is a theme that has come out, in every single conversation that we have. And as a psychologist, it's something that, consistently we see in our professional life, that a deep sense of loneliness is just like a car rusting out in terms of mental health. And wherever we can create something that is an antidote to that sense of loneliness. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I always talk about humans as pack animals, that we are relational creatures.
Absolutely.
We are meant to be together in community. So there's the things we do within community, and then there's the pieces of our own mental health that we manage that can only be managed on our own and are not, so there's many different facets of it. And I'm holding some curiosity about, in those non-communal moments for you throughout your life, in what way has music saved you and helped you?
There were periods of time where especially after my family moved to Pennsylvania, when we lived in Massachusetts, we were close enough to Boston that it was easy for us to get there, to go in for lessons, all of that. We were further from Philadelphia than we were from Boston. And it was not as easy for my mom to get us in there to lessons. And so for the most part, we were studying in further out towns. I wasn't playing in any of the big youth music programs in Philadelphia until very late in high school. And so during the school year, I really was just kind of studying music on my own. And the teacher who I had in Philadelphia when we moved there, he was a fantastic teacher, but I had never had a man as a teacher before. I had certainly never had a loud, aggressive Italian man as a teacher before. And in retrospect, in hindsight, he was an amazing teacher and he treated me incredibly kindly, but I didn't see it at the time. And so I spent a couple of years really just not being responsive to him and feeling like I wasn't getting anywhere on my instrument. And I remember this moment when I must have been like 12 or so. And I'd been studying with him for a couple of years and I was practicing at home one morning and I was incredibly frustrated because I couldn't get this one shift that I had to make. I was out of tune every time. And there was a thing that he was always telling me to do. And I never did it because it was stupid and it clearly wasn't going to work. And he would say, hold the last note before you shift. And in my head, that was, I can't do that because that'll mean I'm not playing in rhythm. How do I hold a note longer than it's supposed to be held? I hold it the right length of time and then I shift. And he kept saying, no, just hold the note before you shift. I just wouldn't do it because clearly he was wrong. And that morning I was so frustrated by not being able to hit this shift that I held the last note before I shifted. And I hit it dead center. And I remember thinking to myself, oh no, he's probably right about other things. And that was really a turning point where I started to, get that feeling back that, right, this is not a thing I do alone. This is a thing I do with other people. This is a thing I do with a teacher. This is a thing I do with other students. I was playing chamber music at that point, but only I had kind of a brother's string quartet. My middle brother played cello, and we knew another family with two sons who played violin and viola. And so between the four of us, we could be a string quartet. But that was not, we weren't really being coached other than by our mothers from the other room sometimes. So I hadn't had that sort of communal aspect for those first couple of years. And it was after recognizing that my teacher actually did know what he was talking about and that he was trying to help me, that helped me get back to that place where I recognized that this is not some lone wolf activity that I do. This is something that I do with the help of other people.
Mm-hmm. And how did that lesson then, as many teenagers and kids do, those real life experiences we have a ripple effect out into other areas of our lives? Where did you take that particular life lesson?
You know, it's interesting. There was a really formative experience that happened at Greenwood at this camp that I was going to that wound up having, that reverberated all the way down to the line to where I am now. And it was that when I was 11, I was there one summer. I was a violin kid at the time. I only played violin. And the thing about youth summer camps, music camps, is we never have enough violists. Because viola is a bulky, awkward instrument, you tend to start on violin and then switch to viola because it's bigger, it's awkward to play, you need to be able to kind of like stretch further. So we tend to give it to kids later. And at a music camp that had 10 to 13-year-olds, which is where I was, they never had enough. And so they would look for violinists who they could kind of convert to also playing viola. And I had a counselor that summer who did not like me at all, and I did not like him. I think I was the most 11-year-old boy of all time. And I was a problem. And he went to the director of the camp and said, this kid needs more to do. Could we please give him a second group on viola? And the director asked me if I knew how to read alto clef, which is the clef violas read music in. Almost no one else uses it. And I had never heard of that. So I said yes. And everything went very poorly from there. They gave me a group, they gave me a viola, and I spent the whole week guessing what the notes were. There was only one true viola kid in the camp, my friend George, and I asked George to show me on the staff where middle C was, and he showed me. It's dead center. And I tried to guess all the other notes from there. So it was a total disaster. I was a mess, and yet somehow I loved it. And I thought, well, this was really fun. Like, I don't know if it was the adrenaline or what, but I kept doing it. I kept playing both violin and viola, not very well at first on viola, but then I took some viola lessons from a real viola teacher and learned that they are different instruments and you do approach them differently. And over the years, my sort of skill level on both passed each other. And I became a more skilled violist than I was a violinist. And I also realized that I really liked the role that the viola plays. And so that changed the course of where I was thinking my future in music was. I had been thinking of music as something I would probably do all my life for fun, but I had other ambitions for a career. And by the time I started really getting serious about viola late in my teenage years, I was on a track where I thought, no, actually, I could see doing this for a living. I really like this. And the denouement to that story of the counselor who started me on viola is he wound up being on my audition committee for the Minnesota Orchestra, which is the ensemble where I spent 25 years of my career. We were in the same viola section together. And on our bios on the orchestra website, it noted that Ken was Sam Bergman's counselor when they were, younger at a camp in Massachusetts, and they have since forgiven each other.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. One of the things I think most people don't know, and I feel compelled to bring it to light, because the music world, I was completely unaware of the reality of it. I thought, oh, look at all these very civilized folk playing these beautiful instruments, playing classical music, playing, these beautiful pieces. Yeah. That my daughter has made sure I know I'm not to call songs. They are pieces. I know that
They
now.
can be songs if there is a singer.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
See, these are the things you don't know as a non-musician. One of the things that you as a viola player, I don't think anybody knows how much smack talk happens.
Oh, yeah.
It is,
You mean between instrument groups?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's like, you think that happens in the sports communities. That's nothing compared to what I've heard. And what is so remarkable is it's all in good fun and so beautiful and funny and community building.
Although depending on who you talk to. I mean,
okay, because I was going to say, it's as a parent, I'm like, you can't talk to people like that. And,
so, viola jokes are sort sort of the backbone of this. And it's the way I always explain it is because most of us start out in life as violinists, and at some point we pull a switch. And the violinists, who are the schoolyard bullies and prom queens of the orchestra, take this as a sign of weakness on our parts. Like, we couldn't hack it on violin, so we've jumped to, the lesser instrument, they think. And in reality, a large part of it is usually you're finding your place.
Yeah.
If you are a real go-getter, type A, competition doesn't scare you, you thrive on it, there is a place for you in the music world, and it is probably violin or maybe piano or maybe oboe, I hear, although it's different. Oboe's different. I don't like to, we can't anger the oboists. But viola tends to be the place where some people who felt a little overwhelmed by the violin mentality found other people like them, and we do tend to be the goofballs of the orchestra. If you go to the Minnesota Orchestra's Instagram page and you watch the reels that they put out, most of the ones that are just goofy and silly and fun, they're all featuring the viola section. And that's, I think, in most orchestras that would hold.
That's wild.
Every once in a while you meet a violist who really doesn't like viola jokes, but most of us take it as a badge of honor, and we enjoy them. And they're fun. A lot of these are basically lawyer jokes that have been repurposed as viola jokes, but there are some ones that are very specific to just the idea of that you're bad at music. Like, that's basically the punchline to all viola jokes is you are bad at music. So,
which could not be further from the truth. And it's such
we would say, certainly, you go ask the violinist, you get a different answer.
Oh, that's, quite a world out there. But it also, again, continues to speak to that concept of it's even within community, you're trying to find the subsets within the community where you really, truly can feel like yourself.
Right.
Really, truly feel like you belong.
Yeah. And even within the music world, people do gravitate to other people who play their instrument because your struggles are the same. If you are a clarinet player and you meet 6 other clarinet players, it is equally difficult for all of you to get across the break in the clarinet when you're trying to get from that one note to the other note and there's a break in between them. It's like famously this thing on clarinet. I'm not going to relate to that as a violist. Right. And so when you get to talk to someone who you can talk about something that's annoying you and you're practicing and they will 100% relate to it without it needing to be explained, there's a power in that. That makes you feel like whatever you were struggling with is maybe not that big a deal because here's this other clarinetist who I like a lot and they knew exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah. And what resonated for me as soon as you said that, something that I see in my office all the time, is that in addition to belonging, humans really, we have a deep need to feel understood by the people around us. And it sounds like that's a key ingredient in that process. Yeah,
I think so. And it's one of the reasons that, even so at Apple Hill, we're primarily teaching chamber music. So we're putting people together in mixed ensembles, small groups, and they're learning to work together towards a common goal. Some of them come into it having a lot of experience with chamber music. Others are doing it for the first time. And you are learning to work with musicians who play wildly different instruments than you sometimes. Sometimes it's a string quartet, but sometimes it'll be, a violin, a cello, an oboe, a clarinet, and a bass. And what do you do with that? Or if you drop a singer into the mix, if it's suddenly a song, boy, there are aspects to vocal music that are nothing like instrumental music, and you better be aware of them. So you're opening yourself up to these new experiences, but that can be scary. And so one of the things that we really try to emphasize is the idea that we always want to be teaching and coaching through a lens of support and encouragement. One of my least favorite tropes of the music world that gets expressed in popular culture is movies like Whiplash or Tar or whatever the Bernstein biopic was, where it always seems to be predicated on this idea that you learn through brutality. That you learn through somebody just being an absolute monster to you. And then later you look back and you realize they taught you everything you know. Well, no, they didn't. They messed you up.
Yeah.
They didn't, not that you couldn't have learned something from that person, but you could have learned it from him a lot better if he wasn't throwing a chair at your head.
Yeah.
And so, and part of that is just a mentality that has changed across the generations, but it hasn't changed so much that a movie like Whiplash doesn't do a tremendous disservice by putting out there this idea that that really is how you learn. And I think this goes hand in hand with the thing we see in popular culture all the time, which is the notion that any creative person, whatever pursuit they're involved in, that their creative power comes from their demons, comes from addiction,
suffering.
comes from their suffering. Exactly. I hate that trope.
Yeah.
Not that people don't learn from tough experiences,
absolutely.
but the idea that somehow it's the alcohol or the drugs that is their creative power, it's not only the opposite of the truth, it's incredibly dangerous. And when we expose young people to that, when you're a teenager and you're angsty for a living, it is so easy to get sucked into that idea that what I really need to be an artist is tormented.
Right.
I need to be unhappy because through that I will achieve great things. Well, you shouldn't have to do that.
Right.
We want to teach resilience. We want people to be able to overcome difficult things. But this idea that somehow it's essential that you be deeply unhappy in order to be creative is so wrong.
Right.
And the thing that I love about Apple Hill is it's an entire organization built around the idea that no, you can achieve everything you want to in music and in life while being kind and supportive and encouraging of everyone around you. It won't be easy, but you can do it. And so we try to model that as best we can.
Yeah. And I think you all do live that. It truly seems like it's part of every aspect of the organization. And can you speak a little bit also to the playing for peace?
Yeah.
Because I think that goes hand in hand with exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So playing for peace is one of these things. So I've only been the director at Apple Hill for less than 2 years now. I've been a faculty member there for almost a couple of decades. Apple Hill has been around for nearly 60 years. And for most of that time, there has been a program at Apple Hill called Playing for Peace. It is these days a little difficult to describe because it has become an overarching ethos of the entire organization. But where it began in the late 1980s and early 1990s was with a tour that the Apple Hill Chamber Players, the year-round resident professional ensemble that is now known as the Apple Hill String Quartet, they were doing a tour to the Middle East. And they played in Israel, and they also crossed into the occupied territories, and they worked with students there. And when they came home, they thought, how can we do something that will have an impact beyond our simply going there and working with students? How can we get their students here? What if we went to our donors and said, we'd like to offer scholarships to equal numbers of Israeli and Palestinian musicians, bring them to an Apple Hill summer, let them play together, let them live together, work together, and see if we can build some bridges. And in the late 80s and early 90s, things weren't great in that part of the world, but there was enough détente that was possible. And so it was very successful, very quickly, bringing students from both sides of that particular divide. And then the program spread out and increased to other Middle Eastern communities, and then to Ireland, where, the troubles had recently been quote unquote resolved, but were still deeply embedded in everyone who lived in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the other parts of the UK. And so students came from Ireland, and students came from Syria, and students came from Cyprus, and from other places in the world where there have been conflict zones. Maybe there's sort of a Cold War aspect going on, but just places where things are not so easy. And there is a need for building bridges, and there is a need for, where I said that I started with the Suzuki method when I started in music. Well, Dr. Suzuki created his method coming out of World War II. And he did it not because he wanted to revolutionize the teaching of music. It was because he was, living in Japan, and he wanted to put smiles on the faces of the children of Japan. And there were not a lot of smiles. And so he wanted to find a way to bring happiness. And I think this was also the beginning of Playing for Peace, was how can we be of service to people who have been dealt a rougher hand than they deserve? And how can we bring them to us? How can we go to them? And so over the decades, this developed into this back and forth where the Apple Hill Chamber Players, now the quartet, go around the world. Just this year alone, they've been to the island of Cyprus, which is still a divided island between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. They've been to Havana, Cuba. And actually, we, for the first time, brought Apple Hill students with us, American students with us to Havana to work directly with Cuban musicians, because we knew that due to the current policies of the U.S. government, we cannot bring Cuban students directly to us. So we thought we will bring the Apple Hill experience to them. And this has become this cornerstone of what we do. And the other thing that it's done is it has created a mini globe on our campus every summer.
Yeah.
Because we don't just have kids coming from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and New York. We have kids coming from all over the US and all over the world. Playing for Peace has also expanded to various urban areas around the country. We partner with community music schools, with youth orchestras, with chamber music organizations, and we partner with them on scholarships to get their students here. We have a huge contingent that comes from Dallas every summer. They're some of our favorite kids. They're amazing. And they're now in second generation, where one of the original Playing for Peace Dallas students is now a teacher in the same program. So he brings his students, and it's just great to see that cycle continue. And it means that everyone is getting to meet people from totally different places, totally different, parts of the world, and just different growing up environments, different musical backgrounds. And because we're intergenerational, we also have some of the people who were at Apple Hill when Playing for Peace started, who were kids then and are adults now, and who continue to come back every summer. And now they're working with the next generation. Yeah. And it's an amazing thing to watch. Just from my perspective, I get to see all these relationships grow and develop, and how they work with our faculty, how they work with the quartet. And it creates, like you said, humans are pack animals. Mm-hmm. There's no better way to create that type of community that we crave than by putting people together who come from a wildly different place and say, but you all have this one thing in common. You all love music. You all want to get better at it. And so we've sorted you together. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And so community, belonging, feeling understood by other humans, and being of service. We know that being of service is hugely protective of our mental health. Yeah. And it sounds like it's something that is deeply embedded in the Apple Hill community. And you lit up when you were talking about it.
Yeah.
It's so very cool.
I mean, when this, I have spent most of my career as a performer. I played in a major orchestra. I got to play with a lot of other major orchestras. There is a part of the music world that sort of holds that kind of career that I had out as kind of the top that you can hope to achieve. And so that's what you're supposed to go for. And once you get it, you keep it.
Oh, you don't let it go.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
But I also mentioned the teacher that I had for the Boston Symphony, Mary Lou Speaker Churchill. And Mary Lou, despite being a principal player in, arguably one of the greatest orchestras in the world, probably inarguably, she left that job at a very young age to focus on teaching. And the concertmaster of the Minnesota Orchestra, the former concertmaster, who was a good friend of mine, a woman named Georgia Fleisanis, she was the first woman ever appointed concertmaster of a major American orchestra. She left us at around age 53, I think, to go teach at Indiana University, and had a whole second act to her career on the education side of things. And I figured that I would probably stay in the Minnesota Orchestra my whole career. But when Apple Hill suddenly had an opening for a director, something sparked in me. And I think that was directly related to the example of these two women who had taught me so much, one as a kid and one as a professional. I didn't realize until I was here. I didn't realize until I'd been doing the job a couple of months, and I realized those were the two people who I'd put photos of in my office. Oh. And I thought, oh, right. Yeah, this is the path that they took. So it's not surprising that I chose this too.
Yeah, the power of mentorship as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. Yeah, there's so many pieces of your life story, Sam, where you can see that there's so many components that help make our lives go in a direction where we can feel fulfilled, and and I know there's always more underneath that for all of us as humans.
Yeah.
But when we think about things like belonging, being of service, feeling like we are part of something bigger, feeling like we've had mentors, so we have some representation, we can look up to see like what might be possible, what we could do. All of those things are so protective of our mental health. So protective of our mental health. And so then when we can see that there are kids growing up or adults who do not have that,
yes,
that's where we know as a community intervention is needed. And so much of the mental health world is one person at a time. And that's part of why we do this podcast, is we are wanting to contribute to focusing on larger community efforts. Because of how protective that can be for all of us. And so I think about pathways into music for the kids where that's the right fit. What do you see as some of the current barriers to getting kids into even trying that on to see if that's the right community for them?
I mean, one of the things that we're constantly talking about at Apple Hill during the year, where we're, engaged in recruitment efforts and our quartet is playing a full season of concerts, we talk a lot about the impact COVID has had. Obviously, it shut the world down for a time. I was in my 40s when COVID happened. To me, it made things inconvenient for a while. But to somebody who was in high school during that time, they lost their high school experience. They lost their summer camp experience. To somebody who was in college and who maybe their graduation was over Zoom, something was lost there. And we don't know yet what the full impact of that has been, but we could see at Apple Hill, and I know from talking to people who run other summer camps, it had a profound impact on how difficult it can be to convince people to leave the house and go with other people and try something new. We got in, a time there where we all learned to just be on our own or just with our immediate families and to survive that. And it was necessary. But coming out of it, I think we just expected everyone to snap back to whatever we were in 2019. And that's not how mental health works. It's not how group dynamics work. And so we've seen that it's been a slow climb back to having, full enrollment in a summer, but it's also we've seen changes in the way that people just are when they're surrounded by other people in an environment like a summer camp. We've seen changes to the amount of diligent preparation that people do over the summer. There used to be kind of a dynamic back in the day, but pre-COVID, frequently, I mentioned that we're intergenerational. So we have participants as young as 13, and I think our oldest last summer was 87. Yeah. And it's one of our favorite things. We put them together in groups. There will be, a 70-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 16-year-old in one group. Traditionally, and we send the music assignments out well in advance. And the idea is everyone's supposed to learn their part and come with it learned. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes, life happens, and maybe somebody had an unusually busy spring. Maybe somebody likes to throw caution to the wind. But traditionally, we used to see that the adults would come very prepared. And sometimes the kids would be a little less prepared. But of course, a kid's learning curve is like this. And an adult learning curve is we're more like this, we're going to learn, but there's going to be plateaus and but a kid will just, whoosh. And so by the end of the week, it was fine. Now, post-COVID, we are seeing the teenagers show up prepared as if this was getting into their number one college. Like they are showing up so prepared with this music, but also sometimes I worry whether they care a little too much. Not that I want anyone to show up unprepared, but the main thing is we want them to just have a good time and feel supported and all of that. And we never want anyone to feel like, it's the end of the world if they can't play every note on day one. Like that's why we have coaches. That's why we have teachers.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking to also something that what you're picking up on, what you're holding some wondering about is why are they showing up so prepared as teenagers when in the past they didn't? So what is it that they're, what is underneath that emotionally that's making them feel like they must do this.
And this could be just me because I was
I don't think it is, though,
absolutely
Sam.
one
I don't
of
think
the
so.
like fly by the seat of my pants kids. I was at,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to watch those dynamics change. And of course, things shift across generations too. Everybody's, you mentioned the Playing for Peace program. That has changed over the decades. And it has changed with the way that we talk about other communities, with the way that we respond to each other in community. It has changed with people's sense of personal boundaries, what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. And it has also changed with the dynamic of teacher and student, which back in the day leaned much more to the teacher's side. It was sort of whatever your teacher said goes. And now I think it's much more a back and forth. Most music teachers I know are striving for a much more collaborative dynamic with their students. But that also means that as an institution of learning, we have to be responsive to some extent. At the same time, we also still need to provide enough of a guiding framework that the kids don't just feel at sea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The notion that, kind of bridging the gaps, that's the phrase that keeps coming to my mind, is like bridging the gaps and, having the experience of as a spectator of music. So for those of you who have been so embedded in it and have played so deeply, and then there's the rest of us that are just, listening to the radio and doing all of that. And so I'm curious about on that other side, the side of pop culture and those of us who are non-musicians and who aren't going to be picking up an instrument anytime soon. I played the clarinet for a brief stint in elementary and middle school. And then when I found out I would have to march in the marching band in high school, it was a hard no for me.
Oh, yeah.
It was a hard no for me as a teenage girl. And so I was done.
Yeah.
But had really enjoyed it. But I'm thinking, Gina as a teenager, laying on her bed, listening to Pearl Jam, feeling like, it was speaking to my experience in some way, even though, you can't always understand the lyrics, but there's something about it. So I'm curious about like those pieces of you, Sam, the pieces of you that are just a kid growing up in this culture and, a man in this culture.
Well, I think, this is something, another of the tropes of classical music that I don't like is the idea that people in classical music only listen to classical music. They're not interested in pop. I have heard people say that there was a time that is true. I doubt it. It certainly has not been true as long as I've been around. I grew up around other kids who played, classical music like I did, and also went home and listened to 10,000 Maniacs and the Indigo Girls and Pearl Jam and all the stuff that we listened to in the 90s, which I'm old enough now that we are full on in nostalgia mode at this point, and I have realized that you could get anything you want out of me by putting on pretty much anything that was on the radio between like 1989 and about 1997. That's all it takes to get me. And actually, one of the greatest experiences of my life was you mentioned Pearl Jam. For me, the Indigo Girls were who I was obsessed with in high school. They came out as queer the same year that I did. They were just such role models to me, but also I had never heard music like that. It seemed to cross a lot of genre lines at the time. And I also just thought they were so cool. And I went to see them twice in high school, which didn't happen a lot for me because we lived in the woods. And about 10 years ago, I got to play with them for the first time. And I had played with lots of famous people. Like, people come through town, they play with the orchestra. I was used to it. I had played with Boys to Men, which was incredible. And I never bothered them. I never wanted to bother any of the guest artists because, it just seemed, I didn't want to do it. I knew I had to bother the Indigo Girls. I knew I had to sort of tell them, and I worked up the whole, here's what I'm going to say. I don't want to drone on and on. I want to just tell them how much their music means to me, how much their careers have meant to me. And I was a mess.
Oh, really?
I think I started crying about 3 words into this. And they were so nice. I mean, they gave me a hug. They were great. But that's a moment where, I'm not experiencing music like a professional musician in a moment like that. I'm thinking back to the way it made me feel to listen to Ghost and Closer to Fine and, the Kid Fears when I was 14 years old. And I still feel that way. That's not something you get from studying music.
No.
That's something you get like deep inside you. And yeah, I think all of us have that. And I have that. And I try, you know, now that I'm old, I still try to make sure I don't get stuck in nostalgia. I love discovering a new artist who I'm not familiar with, looking them up to see if they're going to be anywhere in New England, like in the next year. Can I go see them? Can I, you know, go drive a couple hours to see a show? I love going to live shows. I think that's something that we've lost a lot in the last couple of generations. So much is just streamed now, or, you know, for our generation on the radio. And live shows are a whole different experience.
Yeah.
They're incomparable. You know, and it won't be like listening to the recording. It's going to be completely different. You're going to realize how your favorite artists sound live as opposed to when it's, you know, edited to within an inch of its life. And that's really cool and really fun.
And then you're with people who are experiencing that energy at the same time.
Yes.
And there's something really powerful about that as humans.
Yeah, there is nothing like live performance. And, you know, I mean, I grew up a big radio kid because we did live in the woods. And so a lot of my exposure to music was over the radio, and specifically WXPN in Philadelphia, which is this legendary music station. The local equivalent around here would be the River 93.9 out of Northampton, which comes in all over our part of New England. And I went to so many live shows because WXPN introduced me to an artist. And one of my favorite shows on WXPN came out of West Virginia, was called Mountain Stage. And it was just live performances every week. And I would hear performances of artists I'd heard on record, and I'd be like, they sound completely different. You know, it sounds good. Oh, that person doesn't actually have a 6-piece brass ensemble touring with them. Oh, this other person who I thought was an amazing singer doesn't actually sing in tune, but I guess that's not really what's making him special. And, you know, it was getting to realize that live performance was not the same and that there is a magic to it.
Yeah, a magic to the things that are not perfectly curated for our, you know, for us to absorb.
Which is one of the hardest things for us to teach young kids in classical music, because so much of classical music is drilling you on the fundamentals, because it is very physically difficult. It is a skill that you learn over many years. And so it's easy to get caught up in perfectionism and feeling like if you dropped 3 notes in your performance of this Mozart string quartet that you ruined it. Well, no, you didn't. There were all these other notes that you played fine. And if you were creating a sound that you liked, and if you were doing something that you thought was interesting, then you succeeded. Who cares about those 3 notes?
Yeah. So Sam, music, you said it saved your life. It's clear that it has enriched your life and given a deep purpose and meaning to so much of what you do. As psychotherapists, one of the strategies we use, especially with teenagers, is we do something called lyric analysis, where we want them to bring in a song that speaks to them.
Yeah.
And we print the lyrics out. We sit together. We listen to the music. We look at the lyrics together, and we use it as a platform so the therapist can more deeply understand the individual in front of them, and so that individual can clarify and have us be able to express some of the things that maybe they've not been able to reach about who they are yet.
Yeah.
So I am curious, as we sort of start moving in the direction of wrapping up, 2 questions come to mind that I wonder if you would share with us. One is wondering if there are any particular lyrics and songs that really hold deep meaning for you, and then a classical piece maybe that really speaks to you at this moment in your life.
Okay. Wow, that's hard.
That's a big question. That's what I do. That's what I do to people all day long.
Okay,
Sam, all week long, all day long. Yeah.
Let me start with a song lyric, and I'll stay in character and go back to the early 90s. There is an album by the band 10,000 Maniacs. It's called Our Time in Eden. People who think they don't know this band or this album, you know a song from this album. It's called These Are Days. You've heard it your whole life. It gets played at graduations a lot. Natalie Merchant was the lead singer of 10,000 Maniacs, did a lot of their songwriting along with Rob Buck and everyone else who was in the band at the time. I maintain that Our Time in Eden was the greatest album of the 90s until Lauryn Hill and the Fugees came along. The lyrics of the lyrics of the whole album are amazing. Her lyrics don't read like song lyrics, they read like poetry. And I had grown up on musicians like Leonard Cohen. I was a sucker for anything that read like poetry. There is a song, I believe it's called Few and Far Between, that has some very inscrutable lyrics about that summer fields grew high with foxglove stalks and ivy. There was no girl as bold as you. And it creates not a clear picture, but a feeling. It just sort of wraps you in this sense of what this summer that she's talking about was. And as a teenager, that was so seductive. I loved listening to a song like that, and I could just sort of dive into it like a pool. And I didn't have to know what all the lyrics meant. Some of them probably meant nothing. She used to date Michael Stipe, whose lyrics famously mean nothing half the time. People try to parse every REM song, and when they ask him, he's like, oh yeah, I just wrote that, yeah, no, Bergamot and Vetiver, yeah, whatever. But I loved that words could be used in that sort of impressionistic way. And similarly, the classical music that I have often gravitated to has been the classical music that is a little less foursquare. If you look at kind of the roots of what we think of as classical music now, which is sort of your Mozarts, your Haydns, your Beethovens, they were very German, very Austrian. Everything had these rules that kind of go back to Bach. And the rules are very stringent about how you write, the number of bars in a phrase, the number of phrases in a section, the way that the sections are aligned. There are things called sonata form. Those can make great pieces of music, and I love them. But the pieces that really started to grab me the earliest were the ones by composers who started to break out of that model. And it started again with German composers like Brahms, but then you get into the French Impressionist movement with Debussy and Ravel in the late 19th century. And eventually you get to a composer named Arnold Schoenberg, who would later become known for inventing an entirely new system of writing music that he called serialism, or 12-tone music. I won't get into the particulars except to say people did not care for it. Some people cared for it. Some people care a lot for it. It's sort of experiencing a resurgence, but it can be kind of hard to listen to. And at that point, he was considered well and truly avant-garde. But early in Schoenberg's career, he was writing this lush, neo-romantic music that was kind of blended with what was happening in the French world. And he wrote this string sextet called Verklärte Nacht, Transfigured Night. And it is a 30-minute tone poem for string sextet, which is a weird, normally tone poems are big orchestral things. To get something that epic, you need that big an ensemble. And Verklärte Nacht is this very quiet story. And what the story is doesn't matter. You can look it up. And it's a little disturbing and dark in places, and it's triumphant in others. But this piece is a journey. And it has that same feel as that 10,000 Maniacs song, that you're not going to get every particular thing. This is something to marinate in. And I still listen to that 10,000 Maniacs album probably every week. I listen to my favorite recording of Verklärte Nacht at least once a month, because I love the feel of just letting it wash over me. And that, to me, that's more fun than a piece that I know every single note of and know all the particulars. I would much rather that feeling of just, whew.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And when you just said that, what came rushing at me was recognizing that so much of what is supportive of our mental health is not allowing our emotional landscape to stagnate, allowing things to flow, allowing ourselves to feel them fully and let them move through us, and to acknowledge that they're there.
Yeah.
Usually, as humans, we self-medicate things that we don't want to feel.
Yeah.
And if the more we can get accustomed to that, the feeling is nothing to actually be afraid of.
Yeah.
That the feeling will come, the feeling will go, and music is a pathway into that for so many people.
And I think one of the really underrated ways that music is a communal experience is that when you are with people with whom you have a common familiarity with a certain piece of music or song or whatever it is, you can experience it in a way that you will never experience it alone. There is the camp that I grew up going to, like Apple Hill, tended to assign some of the same pieces year after year because they're great pieces for, students to play, for amateurs, for whoever. And so the same pieces would get assigned and you would hear them year after year. And you would love the ones that you loved, and you would learn what other people at this camp loved the same pieces as you. And I have this really vivid memory of this. There's one piece that gets assigned every single year at that camp. It's called the Mendelssohn Octet. He wrote it when he was about 15 years old. It's for double string quartet. It's insane. And it's the perfect piece for teenagers because it is just pure 100% id. You know, it's like it is just straight through all the way. It's so much fun. And every time this piece was assigned, even if I wasn't in it, I would make sure I was locking eyes across the concert barn with the same friend, because we both knew when these particular moments were coming that just shredded us. And so we would always have eyes on each other when that part happened, because it was more fun.
Yeah.
It was so much more fun than just experiencing it to yourself, to have a friend who's like, yeah, you're feeling the same thing I'm feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Shared experience, shared joy.
Yeah.
You know, it is so unbelievably powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And I love watching that happen at Apple Hill. Sometimes with pieces I have no particular feelings about. And I will, you know, I'll be talking to somebody after a rehearsal or something. One of the things we talk about at Apple Hill is the incredible importance of porch time, which is where you're just sitting on the porch, shooting the breeze with other people about whatever, sometimes for hours. And people will start talking passionately about a piece that you have never really thought about for more than 5 seconds. And you'll learn what it is that just absolutely guts them about that music. And it's so cool because it's so, we all have such different tastes. I spent a good chunk of my time with the Minnesota Orchestra hosting a concert series where, as a bit, I would make fun of composers that I don't particularly like. And I loved making people mad about it. And that is, I think, probably the biggest difference between my old job and my job at Apple Hill. I would never think of doing that at Apple Hill because it is those contrasts and the fact that we all have different preferences. You know, there famously, if you're an orchestral music fan, you either like Mahler or you like Bruckner. You probably don't like both. I was always a Mahler guy. If I run into somebody at Apple Hill who is a huge Bruckner fan, I am absolutely going to want to hear all about it and what drew them to him.
And really understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Will I also still probably tell them what a weirdo he was? Yes, I will. I will do that. But that's because that's fun.
Thank you so much, Sam, for being with us today. Is there anything I didn't ask that you had wanted to tell us today?
I don't think so. But I will just say, as you know, with my Apple Hill hat on, thank you for being a part of Apple Hill, and thanks to your daughter for being with us as well. It's having these connections locally here is one of our favorite things. We do have students from all over the world, but the fact that we also have all these kids who grew up in the Monadnock region coming to Apple Hill every summer is just such a joy for us. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for making the organization remain alive and, you know, vibrant within this community. So one of the things that we do talk about here a bit at MAPS, because we are a spiritually integrated psychotherapy center, and that is not really well understood. We offer very traditional psychotherapy services, but we also welcome in however people make meaning of the world and see the world. It's never about the clinician's spiritual path. It's about the client. And for some people, their path is understanding the world through science or understanding the world through a particular spiritual lens, whatever that might be. But one of the things that does seem to unify so many of the spiritual paths we hear about is the notion of synchronicity. And so the synchronicity of part of why I think Apple Hill feels so very important to me is that when I was a graduate student, and I was with my partner, we rented the downstairs apartment in a barn on Apple Hill in Sullivan. Gosh. And so we were living in the downstairs, and above us was one of the founding members of Apple Hill, the founding violist. Betty, yes.
She was literally in my office this week.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. See, synchronicities. So Betty, we would listen to her. I'm not a musician. My partner's not a musician. But we would listen to Betty play. Yeah. And Betty played at our wedding.
Amazing.
And had a Japanese, I'm going to say this wrong, shakuhachi.
Shakuhachi, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So literally the night before our wedding, Betty came downstairs and she said, oh, hey, a friend of mine is coming. Would you like her to play too? So we said, sure. Yeah. And so we had this unbelievably beautiful music at our wedding, and then we continued to live there with Betty above us.
Yeah.
And so we like to joke that that's the real reason why our daughter is a musician, is that when she was in utero and I was pregnant, she was hearing Betty.
Hearing viola. Betty is such a legend and is, I think, she's one of the people who sort of stands as the monument to what Apple Hill has always been, and that sense of kindness and encouragement. And in fact, the reason she was in my office this week, well, she was there to bring us a pie, which was very nice. We've been having a little like bake-off at Apple Hill among the staff this winter. But she was also there because Betty is going to be joining us this summer, not strictly speaking on our faculty, but she is going to be our Betty in residence, which is a thing that she sometimes does where she'll just come and hang out for a session, and watching, the younger generations connect with her. And she's a master at finding ways to see the people who maybe aren't feeling fully involved and involving them in something else that they like. And it's amazing every time I get to watch her work. She's just an absolute powerhouse.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so very much again, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to say goodbye to our listeners. Thank you so much for taking some time out today to join us here. And wherever you are on your path, we are honored to walk alongside you.